what I wanted to start with is just like for you to share what your experience was in startups and like your exposure to fundraising before Morty, because I know you have a
Sure.
deep background.
Yeah, it's deep and it's shallow. You know, I've been the CTO of four basically venture-backed startups of
Hmm.
various sizes, right? Anywhere from like early stages, just a little bit of angel funding, through you know basically Series B. Um, I've been in the CTO seat, and I've helped tweak a presentation here or there. I've sat in pitch meetings and contributed from a technical perspective. Investors don't really care about things from a technical perspective, so I honestly didn't. I was surprised to find out in like my first handful of meetings they're not grilling into this at all.
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't actually have to be responsible ultimately too much for the outcome of the fundraising, but I
Got it.
helped and supported it, and I was kind of there for it.
That makes sense. And just by virtue of the fact that you had been in accelerator programs and been like deeply steeped in the startup scene, um, had you been exposed to even just like ideas around fundraising or concepts? Had you read content around it?
Yeah, lots of content.
Yeah, tons of
Yeah,
content.
I'd been through, like not as a founder, but as CTO, the Mucker Lab. A lot of parts of that program I'd
Yeah,
experienced.
fantastic program.
Great program. Been in LA for like 14 years or something, in and around kind of the startup world here, and have met tons of people. Um, Been reading Hacker News for a decade.
Yeah,
Listening to the various podcasts out there, reading books, on and off for the last decade. So I've read up on this stuff for a long, long time, right?
okay.
So yeah,
That
and
that makes sense. And so like I guess like there's this shift between being on the sidelines, being a CTO, being on the sidelines, and then all of a sudden realizing that you're a founder and CEO of a company that you wanted to be a venture-backed startup. So do you remember kind of like when you started thinking, okay, like we want to raise money for this? What was it like to like? How did you even think about what you would do?
um, I think to make the plan, a fundraising plan, I first started talking to people. I really just
Hmm.
talked to a handful of former founders that I knew and said, thinking of raising for this, like, what do you think? And the outcome was like, you definitely can. Like with your background, you definitely can raise money with the things that you've done, and yeah, the people you're working with.
Yeah,
Um, and so like initial, like a little bit of validation, I guess, right? Like,
yeah,
and like some hints towards like what it is, and like I would give like the basics and hear back like, don't say it that way, right? And so like my first taste of like, you're gonna have to rethink the way you present this 10,000 times, right?
yeah.
I guess after that, I was pointed at a handful of articles. Here's how you build your investor pipeline. Here's how you do this. Here's how you do that.
Mhm.
Familiar with those at a basic degree, but like started to go deeper on, okay, how will I build out the investor pipeline? Kind of like, what should my strategy be? And it was really just talking to people, like,
Yeah.
what bullet points should I go through to get this done? And, piecing that together through conversations and articles, I would say.
Yeah. And I think that's the approach. That's pretty common. Between like reading a bunch of disparate sources of information and having conversations with people of all different backgrounds, like how did that feel? Like, did it feel like after a couple, you're like, oh, obviously this is what we do? Or were there just general feelings around
Um,
that?
Somewhere in the middle, like I heard a lot of things that sounded definitive and made a ton of sense, and I
Hmm.
heard things that were conflicting, and most of, but more certainty than conflict, I would say. There was more like, here's how you do it, than conflict. And some of that's probably just me. Yeah, like the articles that get a ton of likes and a ton of buzz probably tend to have share similar perspectives, but I realized later they lack a lot of nuance, and that's
Hmm.
just because each situation is different. Fundraising climate is different at different times. different companies are different, and like and also you just can't write forever about the nuance, and you can't learn some of this stuff by reading. You have to learn some by doing, I think.
Yeah. And then it's a good segue. I wanted to ask about that. Like, as you started not just talking to people and reading, but deciding to start doing, like, do you remember some of the main challenges that you ran into, or like uncovering realizations of nuance where you were like, oh, this is hard, or I'm not exactly sure what to do? Like, what were the biggest problems you faced?
Thinking back, I mean, first of all, I didn't understand which funds to go after, you know.
Hmm.
um, Figuring out via Crunchbase, or whatever other resources, which funds are in kind of like you're in their strike zone, even just
Yeah.
the terminology. Like, actually, let me get to that next, right? Like, first, just like what funds can you go after and what funds might care about you right now is something that um, is not easy to figure out, right?
Hmm.
And what funds are worth going after. Then there's, yeah, like what is the terminology? Becoming conversant in the lingo of fundraising to the point where you seem like you have some idea what you're talking about takes a lot of time, and is tricky.
Yeah.
I don't know a short, like, I don't think there's a fast track to it. I don't know how you do it, right? Somebody could prepare a course or something. um,
Yeah.
what else? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, that's all very common, and I hear this a lot. And so, um, now, as you started thinking about, okay, these were, or like I guess you're just guessing at this point, because like there are limitless data. Like, I think what I see a lot is people are like, I don't even know how to find these people, and then they find the massive databases, and then they're like, well, okay, like lots of names, I don't even know what to do. I guess you made a decision at some point to like try and like start interacting with some funds based on whatever filter you used. Did
Hmm.
you start, as you started reaching out, like were there a new set of problems either through reaching out or pitching that you felt like were most challenging to you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I started to build out my database, which was a Google sheet, right? And um, to prioritize as best I could, which was hard, right? And I've just gotten better at over time. But yeah, like, had to keep doing something, right? And so couldn't just be paralyzed. I started to reach out to friends and people that I've known a long time that are very well connected to investors, and to try to basically line up intros. And my plan was to go like full bore, like, we don't really have time to, like, make this into a 6 month thing. Let me try to get this done in like, 6 to 8 weeks if I can. Like,
Yeah.
let's just try that, right? So many articles are like, make sure you get every investor meeting lined up like back to back, within a short proximity of time as you
Yeah.
can,
Yeah.
right? And so I realized later that's actually quite hard to do because people get back to you at different paces, and you can't just like pressure somebody into like responding immediately or to making an intro, and
Yeah.
like there's delays on both, right? So like,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I mean, I guess there were tons of challenges once I actually dug into that phase of, let me get the introductions from the people willing to make intros, some of
Yeah.
which are just logistical, like, who do you know? Let me find that out. And some of which are like, okay, like, what's the, like, etiquette for making these connections,
Yeah.
right? And some of which is like, okay, like, now I'm having the meetings, and like, I am terrible at pitching, right? Like, I'm a technical guy, so like, I'm not the chief storyteller at any
Right.
company previously. I'm not. Yeah, this is not my skill set, and I'm really bad at it.
But at some point, like you were running into these challenges, and this is before you met me, but like you kept going, right? Like
Hmm.
you keep trying. Some of it probably feels like two steps forward, three steps back. I mean, I remember this from my own experiences. Um,
Yeah, it felt
but
terrible.
felt terrible. It felt terrible, right?
I,
You're used to being good at things, right?
I'm used to being good at things. Yeah, like, I think I shared this with you. Somebody's tweet, right? I forget who they are. I apologize. Was like, fundraising is hard. Like, getting into a cool club is hard, right? It's not hard like taking a hard test is hard. And most technical people are used to taking hard tests and not getting into cool clubs. Um, and so, like, okay, like I understand, like I've sold art, right? Like, I've tried to infiltrate worlds that are not my worlds, and like I kind of understand what that type of hard is, but
Mhm.
I was not prepared for it at all.
So there was this awareness, like that there is an opaque cover. I think like if I were to extract what you're talking about, especially the club analogy, is like there's just like this opaque screen. It is like very difficult to understand the rules of engagement.
Hmm.
Um, and and I guess you got to a point where you were looking for introductions or more people to talk to, and when you met me, so like I guess like would love to hear about what you were looking for in terms of guidance or like help or information. Like what was the low point that made you think like maybe I should talk to, or maybe I should try to ask for more advice?
Well, I basically executed my plan of, you know, let me rapid fire talk to as many promising investors as I possibly can. My first conversation went great, and I had, you know, a like great angel investor who wanted to write me a 50K check, and every conversation thereafter was a no or a let's wait and see. Right. So it was like great first convo, like started out
You're like,
awesome.
I'm awesome at this.
I'm amazing. And then it was just no's, right? And so, you know, I'd gone through like a lot of the top folks that I'd wanted to connect with at that point, you know, 50%, you know, let's say, of like the people I initially had on this list, and was like, I'm striking out and this is just not working. And now it feels like truly awful. So like, like there's probably something wrong with my strategy here. I need to better understand, like, my strategy is not just what I pulled from the articles, or I was
Mhm.
pulling the wrong things. um, I'm not understanding the investor motivations properly. So like seeing from their side of the table, obviously working with you, like super helpful from that perspective. And there's just some stuff that unless you're a skilled kind of like negotiator, super empath, or if like worked in that world, is going to be tough.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and and then also I think just like how to pitch, how to tell my story better, like little nuances of like what I'm communicating and how to better communicate it were major things that I thought I needed help with.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And we've had multiple conversations now where I've been able to walk you through certain frameworks and how to think about things, right? It's like I think all the advice that you had gotten early on, which is you and your team are incredibly backable and your idea is great. And so like let's just make sure the strategy to raise money and the approach and the understanding fits all those things, so with those two together, like how do you no one is trying to say that fundraising can be solved like that or that it's easy, but like how do you think about approaching fundraising now and like your understanding of it and at least comfort with how you continue on today and then how you'll do it in the future?
Hmm. Um, I guess today, you know, there were a lot of articles that said don't try to rush this, and when you do it, right, like get all your meetings really tightly done. And I figured I think I can ignore the don't try to rush this part. Definitely couldn't, right? Like could not ignore that. Like establishing relationships with people is so paramount.
Mhm.
Um, and doing that in a low pressure, I'm not asking you for money situation is paramount as well, right? So that was one of many major takeaways. Yeah, telling a story in a way that is compelling, right? Getting people engaged and interested more than uh, you know, actually selling the specifics of what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, why it's the best company, why it's
Yeah.
the best idea. None of that really matters. It only matters if you get people engaged. And this is a soft skill, and this is a, you know, like a hard thing probably for a CTO especially to like accept, is like none of that shit matters. It only matters, do they care, right? Like do they care deeply? Now you're kind of in, right? Um, so I think I'll carry that through, you know, every fundraising round going forward. I think also, um, yeah, just like sort of playing the game a little bit more, understanding kind of what the game is now a little bit better. There is a dating dynamic, but it's like not exactly dating, and how you have to kind of build a little bit of FOMO from one investor to another is a strong lesson.
Yeah.
And that like you don't have a deal necessarily unless you have two, you know, two term sheets, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
you really need multiple people interested, ideally.
And now that like I always think about this as just like helping people have the nuance and context for a lot of the things that you read in disparate sources or the one-off conversations you have. Like, how does
Hmm.
it feel now just to at least have like a greater understanding of the rules of engagement um, and how like fundraisers are put together?
Yeah, I would say it feels much better. I feel much calmer about the process.
Mhm.
Still don't feel good about it because
Yeah,
uh,
it's hard.
it will continue to be hard, and yeah, like later rounds will continue to present unique and different challenges. But yeah, I think having someone with your level of experience and authority around it, uh, time and again, us kind of bouncing things off of one another and landing on something that works,
Mhm.
80% of the time, right? Like after talking to you, it's like, okay, I kind of get it. Like uh, this is advice that for the most part is sticking and for the most part is working. And like when
Yeah.
it doesn't, just I think having one person also that you can consistently bounce things off of makes a
Mhm.
big difference as well, right? Whereas like I'm hitting different founders all the time and like everybody's willing to help just as I'm willing as much as I can to help every founder that hits me up for help,
Yeah.
uh, is great, but you kind of need, yeah, like a consistent rubber duck, also, and ideally a rubber duck that like has been in your shoes and
Yeah.
and on the other side of the table. So
No, that's awesome to hear. And we don't need to share details, but you did raise a really cool small round with really impactful investors. When people in your community heard that you did that, like, it, did people ever have any reactions here? Like, were they asking you questions? Like, what were the initial reactions from your community?
definitely, yeah, a lot of curiosity. The same things that I would have asked other people. How did you do that? Right. Like in like founder community, just like, okay, cool. Like give me the deets, right? Like
Yeah,
break it
yeah.
down. And the questions you're asking too, like what parts did you learn? What parts were hard, right? Like what were your major takeaways? We all kind of want to know that. Um, and raising for, yeah, my company doing something, largely having to do with in-person experiences, starting towards the beginning end of a pandemic, right? Like
It's wild that
it's
you were
just
able to
like
do this, by the way.
so much more frustrating. Oh,
Nice.
just some casual chainsawing going on in the background.
All good. We